Hello, everybody, and welcome to, let's just say, a meeting of the family episode of Top Deck Bots. Now, of course, this episode is, of course, talking about my top 10 favorite cards of Streets of New Capenna. And I'm going to admit right off the bat, while I am definitely a member of the Riveteer family, I still got to give the other family members credit where credit is due, so you are going to see. I was kind of thinking about making a joke of having all the top 10 cards being like Riveteer cards and such, but I feel it would be just more better just to, as my brewing brain goes, just show what are personally my top 10 favorite cards that are upcoming from the set. Now, a few clarifications before we get started. Clarification 1. These are just personal favorite cards of mine. I'm not saying these are necessarily the top 10 best cards of Standard. So, take that at your glance. I mostly like doing jank brewing. I like to find funny synergies and combos. So, don't take my recommendations or kind of like my favorite cards as a way of saying that these cards are going to be meta breakers. If they are, I'll try to make some clarification, but these are just cards I'm going to be having fun playing with. So, let's get that out of the way. With that in mind, second clarification, be very cautious with the cards I recommend, especially when a new set comes out, either on Arena or such. I always say wait about a week or two, especially if you are restricted on your wildcard budget. Kind of like see how the meta evolves and such. See what archetypes are in play, and then if there's any archetypes that suit your fancy, or any archetypes that you think are going to get upgraded from the set, and you kind of see that they did, then I say then you can craft the cards. Nevertheless, now that we got all those clarifications aside, let us now venture to the streets of New Capenna and see which cards are personally my favorite of the bunch. Shall we? But before we get started, I do have a few honorary mentions. First of all, I am actually going to put on the honorary mention one card from the essentially set boosters and such that are coming from the set that are exclusively for Commander. Mostly, I try to keep myself on set cards that are coming from the official set rather than the official side Commander product. However, if you do want me to do kind of like a top 10 of those cards, specifically new cards that are coming from those specific Commander products, let me know in the comments down below. But personally, one of my favorite cards that they did reveal that is in the honorary mentions that are for Commander that are coming from the set boosters, seriously, it gots to be Benny. Benny is just kind of one of those cards where, for those who don't know me, I have kind of like a Tazri Beacon of Unity Rainbow Party token list, where my basic premise is just tokens. Tokens. Make all the tokens. Tokens here, tokens left, tokens right. And Benny giving you the ability to draw a card at the end of each step, being able to essentially draw a card if you create a token before that end step. That's just perfect. As well as the fact that it has a convoke ability, so it works with creature token builds. It's definitely going to be fun just to see essentially how people are going to brew around this commander as their main commander. But mostly for me, I'm just happy for this to be in the 99. Though I will say, boy, is my Tazri deck is getting spoiled from this set. We have a bunch of new warriors, we have a bunch of new rogues, we have a bunch of new ways of generating tokens. We even have ways to make those tokens into other stuff, like, oh my, I am so excited, I cannot hide it, ba-dum-bum. Also, another honorary mention I'm going to have is kind of like the cards that I'm going to say, okay, context. One of the things I usually do when a set's getting revealed and such through spoiler season is I try to have my first deck, kind of like first top deck bots reviews, essentially through a Twitter thread that I'll post in the captions down below. And then there's some cards where I initially review them and I kind of give them a lower score, but after much thought about them, I kind of feel like they're cards I'm going to regret, so this part of the honorary mentions are going to be two cards that I kind of gave an initial lower score, but after thinking about them, realized that they might have a lot more chops, especially in 1v1 formats. Specifically, I'm talking about Ringo. Ringo is just one of those cards where I initially looked at it and, okay, let's just get this out of the way. Ringo is going to be a very good commander card. a very good card in multiplayer formats in general. Oathbreaker, any formats that has like more than 2 players, Ringo's going to be an all-star, especially if you have a tokens list or have a weenies list of some sort. Really, when I was doing my initial score and rating this very low, I think I gave this like a 3 out of 5, if my memory serves me correct, or 2.5 out of 5, or no, it was 7 out of 10, that's what it was. Essentially, I was just looking at it from a 1v1 format, because I thought, in a 1v1 format, Ringo doesn't really sound that exciting. And then I thought about it. And then I thought about it a little bit more, and then I was like, oh wait, we have a bunch of 1-1s that are unblockable thanks to essentially like Kaito from essentially Neon Dynasty. A majority of 1-power creatures are Death Touch creatures, so you can actually throw Ringo in kind of like the Death Touch tribal decks that we've seen that use Finn the Fanebearer and such. And even in general, this could be arguably a better kind of like card draw generation spell than Toski of all things, which that sounds like totally unrealistic. The way I look at it, Toski is kind of like your risky procedure if you want to try to draw a lot of cards if you're going wide. While Ringo is more like the conservative, like, you don't mind if one of your tokens die, but as long as you attack your opponent, you're at least going to net at least 1 to 2 cards, especially if you have like one creature attack the player, and another one of your 1-power creatures attacking their planeswalker, which does count, so you will draw 2 cards from that. So Ringo is kind of like more of a way of a consistent card draw engine. Plus, there's also just the aspect of all the card draw that we're going to be, or it's just essentially all the token generation we're going to be getting in the set, and I kind of realized that Ringo has a lot more chops than I given it at first glance. Another one that I will mention, even though I still think this is not going to be the best card in the world, it's Drop the Truth. This is one where I kind of thought this is kind of our minor out of the set, where it's just just like a hand disruption spell, but wasn't going to be that great. We had better options in the meta, like Duress and all that. And then I kind of thought about it, and I was like, well, this is technically, if we're willing to spend 1 more mana, this is a semi-Duress that also hates on enchantments that get onto the battlefield, which for how many enchantments that we're seeing in the meta, that might actually be relevant. However, I will mention the con of the factor that this does not hit instant and sorcery spells, which that could be relevant, but there could be just a case that Strap the Truth might just be a really good 1v1 sideboard card, so especially in best of 3 inside. So I kind of wanted to put those honorary mentions out of the way. Nevertheless, let's get started with the list. Bada beep, bada boo-hoo!
Number 10.
Number 10 on our list, and this is probably going to be the safest being the craft that is going to be from my favorite cards of the list, and that is going to be the upcoming Triumphs. For those who don't know, the rare land cycle of this upcoming set is now the Shard Triumphs, that essentially of the Triumph cycle that we got for the Wedge cycle in Ikoria. We got essentially the Broker's Triumph, or technically Bant. We got the Riveteers, Jund Triumph. We got the Esper, aka the Obscura Triumph. We got essentially all the Shards from Shards of Alar. We got their respective Triumphs now. So, a lot of people... Riveteer Triumph. Well, I digress. Anyway. But yeah, these are just relatively very good cards, both in pretty much 1v1 formats as well as Commander. The fact that you can fetch them with stuff like Binding of the Old Gods and spells that allow you to fetch lands of a land type. They are very valuable, especially when you can fetch them with like fetch lands in Commander and Modern and all that stuff. They're definitely going to be sought after cards in the set, so keep an eye on them. They have some really cool treatments this time around. Regular treatment, as well as the full art treatment, as well as like I believe the phrase is called Skyscraper Edition, if my memory serves me correct. So, nevertheless, never discount on these lands, and these are really safe crafts on Arena, because you would be surprised how really good they are for fixing your mana and such, especially if you do like a 2 to 3 to multicolored deck design. So, number 10 on the list, Triomes, because they are the safest thing to craft, and they will always help my mana base when I do my janky designs. Number 9 on the list, and this might be a little bit of a controversial pick, but my number 9 card on the list is the Meeting of the Five. Stop. I know what you're thinking. I know some of you might be thinking about going down to the comments and just saying how many content creators have been saying that this was the worst mythic in the set. I know. Just hear me out on this, okay? Okay, meaning the 5. A lot of people have been trying to claim that this is the worst mythic in the set, mostly because this is very, very familiar to Apex of Power. And while there's a little bit of truth to that, I kind of have to disagree. For a few reasons. One thing to keep in mind with Apex of Power, it had some weird kind of restrictions. Like, don't get me wrong, me and the 5 does, and we're going to get to that, but Apex of Power had very weird restrictions. You had to make sure to cast the spell from your hand to get the excess mana, and you only exile the top 7 cards of your library. Me on the 5, on the other hand, keep in mind, you can still cast this from the graveyard and essentially get all this spell's effect of the meaning of the 5. So, cue your Mids' Mastery Historic Brew shenanigans, essentially. And also, even if you cast this for 8 mana, I think this actually has a lot more punch than Apex of Power. And the main reason why is because while there is a lot of restrictions, like, oh, you can only play 3 color spells, keep in mind, we're going into a set that pretty much is a shard set. Like, we have a lot, and I mean a legit lot of free color spells that can have some nice picking of being essentially tutored out thanks to the meaning of the 5. Like, one of the ones that I think is the most cheekiest you can do is, of all things, Rocco.
Rocco? Rocco's a rock, Zoe! Rocco won't know the difference!
Now, QA Rocco's modern life joke here.
Oh baby, oh baby, oh baby.
But for those who don't know, Rocco is an Etzin, essentially Naya, aka meaning that free cost spell requirement. And it says pretty much you can spend Etz mana into it, and when you do, essentially it's Etzin Naya, and then you can tutor for a creature of Etz and then put it onto the battlefield. Since Rocco is a free color spell, we could technically use the meaning of the 5, get a Rocco from the top. If Rocco is in the top 10 exiled cards, we can pump all the rest of the mana into Rocco and tutor for any 7 mana creature from our deck onto the battlefield. We're talking about our Titans of Industries, our Komas of the world. Pretty much any scary 7-drop that we have in Standard as well as in Historic, we can pretty much tutor out with this combo, which is kind of sweet. Plus, there's just other little interactions, like we have all the crime game bosses, essentially, the quote-unquote demon crime game bosses and such. Ziatora, and then maybe get a creature that will go and sack with Ziatora. There's even just shenanigans like maybe getting Falco and a creature that has a counter on it initially, so maybe you can have it so you can have the semi card draw. Like, there are really, and for God's sakes, we're not even talking about charms and ultimatums, which essentially being able to tutor out a charm and an ultimatum with this is actually pretty powerful and such. There's also the one Banta essentially card that went up in price to like $54 because of the Meshi Modern deck. I'm forgetting the name of it. Editor, you can put it up on the screen there. There's just a lot of ways that you can actually do some really cheeky brewing with this. And the factor is, due to the way of how you have to put this in a rainbow deck, relatively speaking, if you are playing a 5-color deck, you are technically probably naturally are going to have a lot of free color spells within your deck design. So, yeah, I am going to say Meaning the 5 has a lot more punch than people are speculating, especially for 1v1 formats, especially in Historic, because you can just get it out with Mrs. Mastery and it has all the abilities compared to while Apex of Power doesn't have that effect. So, number 9 on my list, come on. We gotta have a meeting with the family bosses and have some fun free color spell shenanigans. Next up, number 8 on the list is actually Jenny Faye. Honestly, I just love this card. I love the factor that whenever you create any token, can be a creature token, can also be a non-creature token, so blood tokens, treasure tokens, clue tokens, food tokens, you can create either a cat or a dog. Personally, I love these creature archetypes. I am a dog person. I have 3 dogs, so it's just fun to have these kind of like abilities to just make these bound tokens. Also think it does have some potential competitive standard applications since we do have, yet again, as I stated before, a lot of ways to generate a ton of tokens. Like, there's Eiganjo Uprising if you want to do some shenanigans like Samurai Pizza Cat, pop culture reference here. Though in that circumstances, I would say you want to create the dogs, but there's stuff like that. There's also like Eska's Chariot circumstances. There's the whole amount of ways that we can make blood tokens within Crimson Vow. There's a lot of ways you can actually play with Ginny Faye Jetmir second, and that's not even including all the token generations that we're getting in the set. So overall, I love the shenanigans that this card is probably going to do, and it's going to be, well, to use a classic joke, it's going to be raining cats and dogs with this card. Number 7 on this list. This is where I'm going to be representing my Riveteer family because there's actually going to be free cards at the number 7th, which is all what I would like to call the Riveteer Bundle, which is in this case the Riveteer Ascendancy, the Riveteer Charm, and the crime boss herself, Zeator. Let's start with Zeator. Firstly, it's just a fun card. It's a big dragon, it can fling stuff, there's a lot of things you can fling, and you generate treasure from it. That's just a very good card. Like, you could even, like, for example, you could just, like, essentially play Ginny, that, like we talked about initially, fleeing, like, one of your token creatures and such, which, fleeing a cat, I guess, or maybe from Eska's Chariot or such, and then with all those treasure tokens, you can actually generate them to be dog or cat tokens, depending on your fancy. Like, there's stuff like that. And there's just a lot of cute shenanigans you can do that. There's also just the act of treason, stealing your opponent's creature and then fleeing it. Like, it's just a really fun card in general. Then the next one is the Riveteer Charm. This is the more spikier inclusion, I would say, because I do think this is going to be a card that will see some competitive play. It's just a very versatile charm, does a lot of stuff that people want to do in the current meta, and just taking out the biggest threat on the board can be very, very relevant. And then the one that's kind of in between, this is more like the Jank Brewing, is the Riveteer's Ascendancy, which still, I think, tied with the Maestros, is probably one of the more powerful Ascendancies. Sure, you can't, like, do broken, like, infinite engines with it, but I do feel like with the Blitz mechanic as well, it's just, like, you know, you're gonna be fleeing stuff with Zeator in general. I do think you will get some initial value from returning creatures from the graveyard to the battlefield tab, and there's just some fun kind of like shenanigans you can do with that initially. So, nevertheless, number 7 on the list. Let's just shout it out for the Riveteer family with some fun shenanigans, and of course, flinging all the things. All the things! And then hopefully bringing them back with Ascendancy, and using the charm when we need to, if we're in a pinch. Next up, number 6 on my list, and this one is going to be kind of fishy, pun intended, is Reservoir Kraken. This is just a ridiculously chunky creature for low cost. The factor that it is kind of a Desecration Demon-like spell for blue is very nice, and also the Ward 2 on it does actually help this card out quite a lot, actually. And the factor that with its kind of Desecration Demon ability, you actually get the unblockable fish tokens. That can be very relevant, especially since we have ninjutsu from the Dynasty and such. There's just a lot going in this card, and I think this is definitely one of the more spikier inclusions, though there is a little bit of one high on the list that I do think will be a little bit more competitive and such. Nevertheless, though, let's have some fish and release the Kraken. Shall we? Number 5 on this list, and this one is, come on, we gotta throw a Praetor on here, and that is Urabrask. Honestly, I do think Urabrask is actually a lot more better card than people take for granted. The fact that you do get the extra card draw is actually very nice for specifically aggro-based deck designs, and just the fact that it gets haste is also very nice. Just swing in haste 4, that's pretty much could be a decent top end to aggro decks. We're also kind of like seeing some encouragement of haste synergies, kind of like with the second in hand crime boss from Zeator, which was Orgresh, I think. I'm pretty sure. Essentially, the one that when you attack in with haste, essentially you get a treasure. So that's actually very nice in general. Plus, it's just something I would consider throwing in just Bard class shenanigans, since technically with Bard class, with the discount, it will be technically 4 mana, and 4 mana getting all that is actually pretty good. Honestly, I think it's going to be one of those cards that people are going to sleep on initially just because it's not as quote-unquote hate tech as the other Praetors that we have seen from both Neon Dynasty as well as Counterheim. But I don't think you want to sleep on this. I do think this one's going to have a lot more punch than you would think.
Number 4.
Next up, Tenacious Underdog. This one is just a very silly card in my personal opinion. Just a 2 mana for E2. Perfectly fine, that's a very good aggressive stat in general, but the factor that you can pay for the blitz cost to constantly get it from your graveyard, make it have a hasty free 2, and then net a card draw out of it. Sure, you're paying life, but still, you usually will pay 2 life to draw a card initially, and the factor that that card draw comes with a hasty free 2 they can swing in for aggro damage, I think this is definitely going to be a very good card, especially for aggro-based deck designs. I could even see this being in some mid-range decks. It definitely has some punch, and also some really well-defined abs, I will say. Nevertheless, though, I do think this one is going to have quite a punch in the meta. See what I did there? See what I did there?
Number 3.
Next up is number 3 on the list, and this one, it had to be on the list. It's probably one of the more powerful cards from the set, and that is Obnixilis the Adversary. This is just a silly card. 3 mana for just a Planeswalker. Like, the activated abilities are not that exciting, but the factor that makes this kind of definitely a lot more better than it would be is the factor that it has the Casualty, which the Casualty has where essentially you can do Casualty Ets and you make a secondary non-legendary copy where Ets is the sacrifice creature's power. This is very powerful. Like, the factor that just getting one of these is on average would be alright, but the factor that if you pay for the Casualty you get 2 of these effects, it actually provides a lot of versatility. Like, you can use one of the copies or the original copy to make, like, the little devil token, and then do the hand discard, which then allows you to get a little bit of life gain. You can also just minus both of them, and then just get 2 tokens on the battlefield. You could also just go constantly, just essentially plus, and then constantly try to force your opponent to either lose life or discard cards, which is very good. And then, of course, if you use Casualty 7, like sacrifice a creature with power 7 or less, you can just automatically use the copy, activate the ultimate, and then just draw 7 cards and lose 7 life. Or if your opponent's at a low enough life total, you're going to essentially just do the ultimate Sign in Blood finale against your opponent. Yeah, there's a lot of versatility that this card is going to do. It is definitely one of those that I can see the Rakdos sack decks, especially the artifact-centric deck designs, definitely giving it a shot at, and even trying to do some little Mardu mid-range shenanigans. Yeah, I think it's a safe bet that we are going to see Obnixilis in a few decks in the upcoming meta. And that's why Obnixilis is number 3 on the list. Number 2, and this one is going to be a little bit cheating because technically there's 2 cards on this list. Let's first talk about the first one, which is Giada. Personally, I think Giada is just a very, very powerful angel that we got from New Capenna. Just a 2 mana, 2/2 Flying Vigilance. Granted, it dies to all the early removal in the meta, but still, if you can keep this, like, protected with a hexproof spell or protection spell, this card gives you incremental value throughout the game. Like the factor that all your angels will enter with additional counters on it. That's very good. The fact that it can also be used as a mana dork itself. And just simply put, it's a 2/2 Flying Vigilance Angel. Angel decks really needed their 2-drops, and this is just a perfect 2-drop for the deck. Not to mention you can do some shenanigans where if you can get like extra clones like using Delina and such, or maybe even Helm of the Host, then the counters get incrementally more, and oh my, Giada is just it's a silly Magic the Gathering card. Like, Angel tribal players are gonna love this. Hop Queen of Snow, love the card. There's a lot of people who are going to love playing this card. And I think it's also very synergistic with the other card that is in the number 2 spot, which specifically is the Sanctuary Warden. This, I think, is very synergistic, and I do think Giada and Sanctuary Warden are going to be both in the same deck. The fact that Sanctuary Warden essentially gives you the ability to essentially get the 2 shield counters on her initially, Plus the additional +1/+1 counters when Giada comes in, if Giada's on the battlefield. Then it allows you to essentially remove those +1 counters, or even any of the +1 counters. Maybe you put on other angels with Giada and such, and get the citizen tokens, which is very nice. It'll allow you to go wide strategy. Yeah, this one is just going to be a limited bomb, but I also think that there's going to be some silly shenanigans you could do with this in standard. So yeah, number 2 on the list, Giada and Sanctuary Warden. Both some very powerful angels that are going to do some heavenly retribution against the meta. And they're going to be some fun cards to play with. I'm not going to deny that either.
Number 1.
And my number 1 card, and this one I'm going to be talking about a little bit about. It's another one where we're putting 2 cards in here, so it's tied, but I do feel like this is one where it had to be together. It's like peas in a pod. Me and Cooper. Just, peanut butter and jelly. Coke and a nice slice of apple or pecan pie. And in this case, the number 1 cards, I guess, plural, is Elspeth, as well as Luxior, Giada's Gift. Okay, let's first talk about Elspeth. For a minute there, when I first looked at Elspeth, I think Elspeth was relatively a good card in general. The fact that you can get the +1 to make your creatures bigger with the +1 counter and such, and then just get their choice of lifelink, vigilance, or flying. That's good. The -3 also being able to tutor for any permanent card, essentially with mana value 3 or less, put a shield counter on it. I was thinking about some silly shenanigans with this, like with the Ascendancies or stuff like that, but there is relatively powerful Dream Drops in the meta currently that this minus is actually very good. And yeah, if you can get to the ultimate, getting all the angel tokens can do some silly shenanigans. But I have to admit, I looked at this card a whole different light when we saw the preview for Luxior, Giada's Gift. This card is nuts. A 1-mana equipment that allows you to equip to a Planeswalker, which is something we've never seen before. And the fact that it makes the Planeswalker into a creature, that it is pretty much its power toughness is equal to the number of counters on it. You kind of see like the clever top-down design they had with this, where essentially you synergize this with Elspeth. So when Luxior gets equipped to Elspeth, Elspeth can plus herself with the +1 and make herself into a ridiculously big either vigilance, flying, or lifelink creature, which I have to admit, that is some clever top-down design, that, especially with the story and such of how Elspeth just essentially gets the sword and all of that, and how she was able to defeat Omnitless. Spoiler warning, y'all. Anyway, so that was just some ridiculously clever design there. And then when you just look at the card itself, there's just so many silly shenanigans you could do with this card. Like, everybody already talked about the Modern, about the Devoted Druid technically combo with this, where you can essentially equip Devoted Druid with this and get infinite green mana. But even if we can, and also the fact that if you equip it for free on any creature with counters, aka fractals, it makes the creature ridiculously big. But then there's just the whole other aspect of it, of the factor that you can equip any Planeswalker with this sword. So it allows you to actually look at the whole history of Planeswalkers in general, and think of what would be nifty if they actually coincidentally just become a creature. Like, case in point. Actually, let me take a side note here and actually look. You know what cards came in the mail today because I was essentially wanting to play with them with Luxior? Gideon's. Gideon's is ridiculously synergistic with Luxior because, like, for example, Gideon Blackblade, essentially, but during your turn, it's a 4/4 human soldier creature with indestructible that's a Planeswalker. Put Luxior on it, and guess what? Technically, it's still considered a Planeswalker, so you can equip it with a 1 without a sweat, and then essentially it is initially starts with 4 loyalty, so you essentially are attacking with an 8/8. Or even a 9/9 if you're able to plus Gideon and such. Like, there's stuff like that. There's even Gideon Ally of Zendikar, where essentially you just get the 4 loyalty, and then you can just make it a 5/5 indestructible creature, which then you're attacking in with a 9/9 with Luxior equipped to it. Like, and that's not even talk about cards within the set when you think about it. Like, for example, with Omnitless, if you sacrifice a ridiculously big creature and just get it up to a high loyalty but still keep it there, Play Lutzer. Oh, hey, you're swinging in with a ridiculously big Omnitless that's either like could be like a free 7799, etc., etc., etc. Like swing in and then do the ultimate, which then could help finish off a game and such. Or even the new Vivian in the set, which personally love the Vivian. It was more in my top 20, but not in my top 10. But you can even equip Vivian, make it a 6/6 creature, swing into it, and then +1 Vivian, sack herself to the +1, and just 2 to 4 7-drop. Like, there's so many Planeswalker synergies of both in current that's within our current to essentially pull, as well as upcoming Planeswalkers that we're probably going to see in the future and such. Like, you always have to keep an eye on Lutzer because it can do some silly shenanigans. So, yeah, number one card, my favorite card personally from this set, it's got to be the new Elspeth, and it's got to be Lutzer. Like, oh my, there's some silly shenanigans you can do with this card. And that is my top 10 favorite cards from Streets of New Capenna. What are your personal favorites? You can write them down in the comment down below. Maybe talk about your 2 cents of what you think about the meaning of the 5. Whatever's your stake on it. Nevertheless, I hope you all have a lovely day. By the time this video comes out, should be the pre-release. I hope you enjoy the pre-release and enjoy the shenanigans of the set when it comes out on Arena on the 28th. Nevertheless, I hope you all have a lovely day. As they say, hip hip hooray.